And we are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. We have week 8 of Game Production Masterclass, and again with us is Josh, aka Stuff Wombat, and we will continue our prototyping session from the last week, but this time we will go more into like practical and pragmatical stuff. And Josh, just before we talked before the talk, he told me that he has like a of really lot of slides, a lot of like stuff prepared for you. So I'm gonna be short, and I'm just gonna give him the word. But just before we go into that, as always, I'm gonna thank our partners and sponsors who helped make this project come alive. And first of all, this is Center for Creativity, which is project also like part of partnership network, and is co-financed by European Union and the Republic of Slovenia, and also our sponsors from the industry, Outfit 7 and Criterion, and also like partners who like boosted this project, Reveris and Slovenia Games. So as always, we will have notes, and you can like take notes beside the talk. I will post the link shortly, and this talk is going to be 1 hour of like lecture, and then around 15 to half an hour of Q&A, depend on how many questions or how interesting or how long they will be. And you can always check the Discord at the end for the homework, and homework will be also announced later. And I think that's it. That's all. Josh, it's your time to shine, and we can start with this lecture. Good
Sweet.
luck.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you for all the homework that was sent in. I will get it today. And it's good that so many of you sent the homework in, because you will need it today. Again, it is a 2-step homework. It builds on itself. Because this is also the second part of prototyping. We have 2 hours. Last time I talked a lot about exploring, about the crazy esoteric stuff, and I'm sorry, but this will get a little bit worse today as well. It will get even more abstract and crazy, and then I will catch it all, I hope, with a lot of examples from my private work, where I will show you kind of how I prototype and what I mean when I say all of these crazy abstract words. Also, this time, as a kind of special feature, I actually tested the slides to see if it will change when I switch. So now I learned from the prototype of the last week lecture, and I have improved on my slides. They are still very basic, but they are now better. There is also more graphics. So last time I said a lot of times, and I will say it again a lot of times this time, is that prototypes are interactive tests that you throw away. I will talk about this again in a short while. Then we talk about exploratory prototyping, which means in the metaphor that I use, it means you sit in the boat and you just go into the ocean because you like to smell the salt and like see the clouds, and because you kind of want to, you want to go out there and just see what's out there. And in the short term, this will probably mean that you will like sink the boat and you will drown. But because this is a metaphor, you will not actually die. So you will have long-term benefits of learning and understanding stuff about the world of video games, which you can then collect in the map of the possibility spaces, where you can kind of like understand what kind of connections and emergent behaviors are generally always happening in the video game. And this was the homework, to kind of make a map out of a little platformer, to get into the kind of spirit of mapping this out. This time, we will talk about so much stuff. It's great. We will talk about exploratory prototyping and directed prototyping. I will focus on the directed prototyping today. I will go through it to say, what is the opposite of just sitting in the boat and going out into the ocean and probably getting eaten by a metaphorical shark. We will talk about the opposite of that, the kind of smart version of that, where you have like a suit and a tie and an actual job and don't get eaten by metaphorical sea monsters. Then I will, this is what I added is to talk about the prototyping and the production, to kind of like clarify something that I think maybe last time I didn't really get across so well, where it's like, how does a prototype fit into the production of the game? And when does it happen? Because it happens basically all the time. And then, I will, this is the biggest confusion part. I will talk about immediate and structural prototyping, which I will explain then. I personally think I love it. I think it's really, really great. I hope I can convince you that having a lot of graphs on the screen is interesting and good. After that, after this, we have covered the kind of basic, important, abstract stuff of prototyping, and I will talk about honesty, which is in game design or game development the most important thing you can have. It's even better than having a good gaming PC. It's even better than having a big budget. I have to say that because I don't have a big budget. So we will talk about honesty, and then, after all of these like big concepts and metaphors and graphs and all of that stuff, I will talk about personal projects and how they fit into all of this. I will give you concrete examples of all of the different steps that I talk about, and then I will say a summary of the whole 2 lectures, and then you will get homework. It's going to be great. I have to always check the time, and it's already too long. I think I will have to speed up a lot, because in my tests I have very big differences in how long it takes me to do this. So about me, very, very quickly, I'm an independent developer, which means that I depend on the people around me, but there's no publisher who hits me with a stick if I don't work fast enough. I make many, many prototypes and put them on social media, which, is not very good, but which helps me get a following, which then helps me sell some games in the end. I made some games, which you will see today. And prototyping is very important for me to save costs, because the production value part of the development cycle is very important, is very expensive for me. Like my costs of living is basically just the rent and what I eat, and sometimes I buy a new t-shirt. But if I hire someone, suddenly my burn rate for every month is like 300% higher. And so it's very important for me to know what I'm doing before I add the production value, because the production value is extremely expensive for me. So prototype is important because it saves money for me and hopefully also saves time and energy for you. It's an interactive test that you throw away. I said it again. I will say it one more time. So this is a prototype, but last time we split it up into 2 types of prototype. We have the exploratory prototype, which is an interactive test that you throw away. There's a different kind of focus here. It's still interactive because video games are interactive. So every test of a video game has to also be interactive. Otherwise, you are testing your skills at drawing. You're not testing your skills at video game making. And then the test part, when you go exploring, what you're actually testing is kind of like whatever, you're testing the world, you're testing the wind, you're testing, whatever, man. It's kind of like a hippie version of a test. And you throw it away. And that's the important part with the exploratory prototype. What you end up creating has a very high chance of being, put into the trash bin, because you just get the information from it. On the other hand, the directed prototype, which we will talk about today, is interactive because all games are interactive, blah, 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 but it's a test. This is the important part of a directed prototype. It's a test. It's a real scientific big boy test. This is what most people talk about when they talk about prototyping, is that you have an idea and then you test if it's correct or not. I think it's only a small part. This is why I split it up into exploratory and directed prototyping. This directed prototype is the test. And you still, maybe you have to throw it away, but the chance is higher that you get to keep it. So this is what we will talk about now. We have the sliding scale again. I draw it again because this is the second iteration and everything is prettier and better. So we have the exploratory on the left side and the directed on the right side. And last time we get into the middle. We get to the middle between exploratory and directed. And now we will keep going until we reach 100% directed prototyping. So directed prototyping has a goal. It can be easily tested on whether it's successful. And so it's less free and less fun because it's work. Last time I talked about becoming a baby and like letting go of all of your preconceptions. Now I will talk about, work, which for me is less fun. For many people is a lot of fun. I am obviously biased, but this is my class and you cannot stop me. So we start in the middle, right where we left the last time. It's almost as if if there wasn't a whole Easter break where everyone eats a lot of food in between the two lectures. We start in the middle with the idea-driven prototyping. Last time I say, oh, this is already kind of like becoming boring, kind of like becoming very structured and very like you have a suit and a suitcase and stuff. But it's more effective if you say, I want to make X. If you get into the boat and you say, I want to go in this direction. I want to go over there because I think that there will be a cool coconut or whatever. The problem is that you will probably not be able to make whatever you want to make. Because the ideas that you have are cooler than what you can make. This is like when you think of the slide as like, on the one side is the baby and on the other side is the business person. Then in the middle there is a kind of teenager who is like, I will change the world, and then you play Dota for like 2 hours, for like 2 days and eat a lot of Doritos. Your ideas are kind of like out of your grasp here. You have this kind of like, I want to make all this, but you can't really because your ideas are kind of like floating all around because they're stuck between being like very loose and very concrete. But when you make a prototype based on an idea, what you make is probably not going to be what you wanted to make, but you can iterate on it, right? You have a first thing and you can work on that and you can keep going on that. And you don't have to throw it away that much because if you really want to go there, then every step in the direction is a small step in the right direction. So this is the idea-driven prototyping. But then if we go further, more, even more away from the playing Dota for 2 days and eating a lot of Doritos, and we go more to the having a suit and having a job, we get to copy-pasting prototyping, or copy prototyping, as I write here, which is, more specific than, I have an idea. I want to make Zelda. This is kind of unspecific. But if you say, I really love the Zelda dungeon with the water temple. I want to make something like this. It's more specific, right? You have a clearer idea of what you want. It's even less just whatever. It's even less just going out on the boat and like dying to a shark. It's much more specific. It's more focused because you like this thing and you want to make another thing like it. And since what you love so much is already there, you can just copy and paste it, right? It's not that easy because when I write this, I have to think of the Estus flasks of Dark Souls, which I started playing recently, which is a very good game apparently. Who knew? Dark Souls is good. So what happens when I look at the Estus flask system of Dark Souls and I say, oh, I really like this idea that you have like 5 items and you carry them with you and you can use them to heal, and when you reach a checkpoint you fill up the items to 5 again. I think that's a really cool system, so I will copy it. And then what you also end up accidentally copying is all of the different fragments of other systems that relate to the Estus flask. Because when you have the Estus flask, you're like, oh, okay, I can upgrade it if I get a certain item. So suddenly you have to have an item in your game because you need the item to upgrade the Estus flask. And then, you have the experience points because they relate also to the upgrading. And then you have all of these different things that come with copy-pasting. It's like when you copy-paste a picture, you copy-paste the metadata or something like that. That's I don't actually know how that works, but like when you copy-paste something, you don't just take it cleanly out. You take like fragments of all the other systems out, which means that what you are copying is not actually really a copy. And then because you don't have the production value and because you don't have the money and because you don't have all of the other systems, what you copy will, never really be like it. But it is a specific task and it's a specific thing and you can test how effectively you copy it. And copying is effective, right? Will come up later in the talk again. If you just take something that already exists and that works for many people and you steal it, you save a lot of time of exploring. You don't need to go and die to the shark 500 times. You can just take this thing that already works and like use it as a bridge to go over the ocean. The metaphor is getting more and more convoluted as we go on. This was also talked about in week 4, where in the larger structure part, he said that you just steal stuff. You just steal stuff that works. It was in the game design talk. It's great. So then if we go even further away from being like a little baby who just does whatever, and even more in the direction of having a big job, we get to commissioned prototyping. This is, no longer really yours. It's no longer your desire. You stop being a child and you get a job. And getting a job means doing stuff that, other people want you to do. It's kind of sad that this is how it is, but, there's a job. So suddenly you need to test X. You no longer want to test X. You no longer love this thing and therefore you want to do it again. You get the job task to do this. And so you need to check if it works, which, comes with clear specifications and goals. It's very, very nice because suddenly this is a big step in the sliding scale that I present, because suddenly you are no longer 100% responsible for setting the parameters of the test. Because you get the specs and the goals, right? Like someone comes to you and say, oh, we need a printer that prints like very fast. And so you don't need to worry about like your goals and like where do you want to go and how does the salt, all of these hippie stuff goes away. And instead you just get a clear job and you just need to see if it works or not. If you do not get clear specifications and goals, from your boss or your manager or from yourself in this case, because you can also just commission yourself in a kind of schizophrenic way. If you do not get these clear specifications and goals, you have to ask for them. You have to. I have seen people go into burnout and quit the game industry and like get seriously depressed because they constantly got jobs without clear specifications, without clear goals that they could achieve. If you constantly get a task and you don't know the parameters of success, you will get depressed. It's like you can probably prove it with some rats in a science lab in Harvard or whatever. It's not good for you. You need clear specs and goals if someone forces you to work for them. It's like a science test where you don't control the parameters. Like you don't control the setup and all of that stuff. You just execute. And you get to be creative in that execution. But the goal has been chosen for you. So this is commission prototyping. And then if we go right to the edge, right? Like to the platonic ideal of a directed prototype, which is, not really real. Just like you cannot really become a baby if you become 100% exploratory. But in this platonic ideal of a directed prototype, I call it 100% clarity prototyping. It's like reaching heaven. Is when you say, I want to do this to see if it results in X. It's a very convoluted, weird, strange sentence, but it gives you the kind of ownership over the thing again, because you will have 100% clarity of what you want to achieve and why you want to achieve it. This can even just mean that you completely understand why your boss wants you to do this test. But just the knowledge of like why you do the thing and what you test for is really good, because you not only test how you get to the destination, how you get there, but then when you get there, you can also compare if this is even what you need. And this is such a big step again, where you go like, okay, there's something even larger than just my goal picking. It's the thing that happens when you say, I really want to be the best Pokemon trainer in the world. And then you become the best Pokemon trainer in the world. And then you look around and you're like, maybe I should take up gardening or something. And then you become happy. Because when you really know where you want to go and why you want to do something, and then you succeed at it, you gain a whole bunch of perspective. And if you know where you want to go and you don't succeed at it, you can compare why, and you can learn and you can try again. This is a kind of standard teaching. Like I said before, the directive prototyping is kind of what people talk about when they say, oh, this is how prototyping works. I think it has more dimensions. What also happens is that you can test the emergent qualities of the thing and like really, really test them. Like you can see, I want to do this and I think that it will do this, but then it actually does something else. And then you can kind of understand why when you're thinking in these very concrete terms of like, I want to do this to achieve this. The emergent qualities are suddenly kind of like captured in a net, and you have something to compare them to. This is the kind of bonus thing. But this full control over this complete mental clarity requires, complete mental clarity. It's not an easy thing to achieve. If you want to do this, you need to be sure of what your larger goal is. The goal cannot just be, I want to make a good prototype, I want to make a good game. The goal has to be a concrete, large thing, you know, that you can approach from many sides and that has many different facets. And that's really hard. We will talk about that later. But directed prototyping as a whole gets clear results, right? Because you have a clear goal. It's effective and cheap because you compared to it doesn't need to be cheap, you know, and it doesn't need to be effective, but it's more effective and it's cheaper than when you just sit in the boat and see where it takes you. So compared to the thing that I talked about last week, this is cheap and effective, but it's also limited, right? You're kind of railroaded by your preconceptions. You can never expand your horizon significantly because you already know where you want to end up. And the only way to really understand more about the world is to end up where you want to go. If you fail in your attempt to reach your destination, then you just, you know, you have to try again and again and again and again. And at some point, maybe you reach the place where you wanted to go and you can kind of like breathe again and look around you. But if you just go exploring, that's going to happen automatically. And it requires a clear goal, you know, even if that clear goal is just, oh, I want to make the water temple from Zelda. That's a clear goal, right? It's impossible to achieve because you cannot rip the water temple out of Zelda, but it is clear. And so it will get clear results, even if you might not like those results. So this, you know, this is the fast version. This is the kind of dichotomy. I love that word. I only learned it this week. It means when you take two things and put them against each other, and so they appear to be the totality of all things, right? I mean, they're kind of terms I made up for myself to better understand how I work, but here we have something that allows us to think about how we prototype. We can explore, or we can, you know, try to achieve a specific thing. And so I put all of the different types of prototyping here on the scale to like sum them up and I just want to reiterate again, these are things that I made up for myself. I'm putting them here in this talk because I think that they can help people, because they helped me to like kind of be able to check myself where I'm at and what I'm currently doing. This is not a sort of industry standard or anything. If you go to an interview at the Skyrim at Bethesda, they will look at you funny if you use those words. This doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. It's just, you know, they're not really that commonplace, but they're extremely useful to me. So we start with exploratory prototyping, which is the goo goo gaga, I'm a baby, I just knock things over. Then, you know, we become more and more concrete. Suddenly we have like the tools and the toys, then we have the kind of specific interests, and then with the idea, with the concrete thing, kind of, that's already, you know, that's on the verge between being a baby and having a job, an idea that kind of wants to do something specific, but also isn't really sure about it. And then we get into the kind of concrete directed territory where you can copy something, or where you get commissioned, where you get like a clear job. And then the ultimate perfect platonic ideal is the one where you know your larger goal and you can just concretely test for it. It's beautiful when it's like that. It's never really like that, but we'll talk about how to get there as well. I just want to add a small thing, and holy damn, I'm probably gonna over time. Keeping the code of your prototype is always an option. Last time I said, you know, you should throw the code away, getting the code is not the goal and whatever. You can keep the code. If you make a prototype and you think it's really good and you want to integrate it into your production, sure, why not? Keep the code. But it should not be the stated goal of the prototype to produce code. This is just a different version of what I said last time. Maybe that's a little bit nicer. You don't want to make a prototype to kind of produce code. You want to make a prototype to get information, and then you want to use that information to make good code that you can use and understand and read 2 years later as well. Because, you know, prototypes are tests. And here, this is an interesting thing. If you are doing exploratory prototyping, there's a very low chance that the code that you're making, that the stuff that you're making, will be kept. You know, it's a very low chance that what you're doing when you're exploring is actually usable in a commercial product, or even, you know, in whatever product. If you're doing directed prototyping, the chance gets higher that what you're doing is actually usable because you're working towards a clearer, specific goal, and therefore don't write as horrible spaghetti code as you would otherwise. So the big question, now that we finally talked about what is prototyping, right? It took me 1.5 hours to kind of define all of the different facets of it that I think are important to know. The big question is, when in the production do you prototype? Of course, ideally, you make a prototype, you make the test in the beginning. But realistically, you're constantly prototyping. Because as we've just, as I have just said 100 times, prototypes are tests. So in production, you will encounter stuff that you will need to test. And you will encounter that stuff all the time. So this is a video game production, right? You start at the left. I think it's mirrored again. So we start at the left and then we go to the right. This is kind of how it is. But then actually, we have a bunch of branches that didn't work out. And these are the instances in this very simplistic, very beautifully drawn model. These are the instances where our prototypes didn't work out. No matter if it was exploratory or directed, if there's a big X, it means, this is kind of a bad way. This is something that we had to revert, that we had to kind of walk back on. But actually, what happens is that you don't completely walk back on them, right? This is a kind of strange slide change. I will switch between them quickly, because it's not that you make a prototype and the prototype, isn't what you want, and then you go back. You only go back like half of the way, right? The direction in which you prototype, some of it, you will still like, some of it you will still keep, some of it will remain there. You will not throw away all of it, at least from my experience, speaking from my experience. I never really throw away everything. Something of it remains. Not always, but most of the time. So what actually happens is that you don't have a straight line of development. You have this kind of like strange thing of like going down wrong ways and then walking them back and then taking a different turn somewhere else. So, we have this kind of like squiggly line of development. And then what happens, to me, at least over time, if I'm not careful, is that I kind of forget all of the bad things, all of the wrong versions of the game that happened. And I just realize like, oh yeah, there were some bends and there were some kind of friction in the process, and there was some kind of strange stuff going on. But in the end, we got to the result. And so a lot of the stuff that I read, I'm kind of skeptical, because a lot of stuff about productions that I read, I'm skeptical about, because there's the dead ends just get forgotten and kind of not mentioned. And then, you arrive at this and you're like, oh yeah, no, we just started it and we stopped. It was a production. That's how it is. It's not how it is. Video game production is a series of testing and changing and testing again. The important thing is that only when you're done testing, when you feel like this is really, what it should be, only then do you add the production value. This is, if this is again one of the things where I see so many people, myself included, all the time, struggle with their projects and drop them, is because they add production value before they are sure of what the game is. If you want to take one thing away from it, then please only add production value, which means like animations and kind of juice and all of that stuff, the kind of like hard-coded level events and stuff. Only add that. Please only add that when you're sure that it's going to be there in the end, because otherwise you're going to waste so many resources. Like I said before, my burn rate basically triples as soon as I hire any artists. So we have this kind of dichotomy, as I said before. We can either go explore the prototype, and we can either go direct prototyping. But as I said before, these kind of decisions happen in the whole of the project. They happen again and again. You have to always kind of like do a little bit of testing here and there. And so I made another beautiful model of a development process, right? This is how a purely exploratory development process looks like in terms of my graphical model, which means that if all you're doing is exploring, right? If you refuse to kind of set a clear, specific goal for your project, and you just go and you try something out and you don't like it and you throw it away, and you go and you try something out and you don't like it and you throw it away. If you just keep going with your ship in random directions off of the island and you hit different rocks every time, at some point you're going to get very far, just randomly, right? And then you're going to be like, oh, great, here there's a new island, I will make a little house, and then I will do the same thing again. This is purely exploratory prototyping, where you say, I will just do random shit until one of them works, and then I will keep going from there and just do that again and again and again. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's one way to work. And the whole idea behind this, like these convoluted models and the terms and the dichotomies and the graphs, is just to help you visualize how you can work. And this is a purely exploratory approach, where you just go, I'm completely, whatever, man. I'm just gonna get in my boat. I'm gonna see what's out there. And then, interestingly, what happens is, if you do that in a project and you do it again and again and again, you're gonna still, automatically, you're gonna need to do less exploring, because there's some directions that you already know don't work. There's some directions where you already ran into a mountain and sank, right? Even if you don't care about the goal, you're still gonna have some information carry over, so you're gonna need less and less exploratory prototyping over time. And then this is the other kind of extreme version, where you go purely directed. You say, I want to go there, and then you go there. And then you say, I want to go there, and then you go there. And it's like, oh no, that's a bad thing. Let's go back. And then you do the opposite. And then you go there. And then you do a thing. And then you realize that's not good. And then you do the opposite, right? It's a methodical approach where you don't need as many tests, but you also, maybe you're missing something really beautiful, right? Like here, each of those stupid branches could have been perfect. And here you just take something that's really bad and then you do the other thing. So it's, it's more limited, it's more rigid, but it's less expensive, at least in the short term. Over the long term of the career, I think going crazy and being a hippie is very important. So we covered now when to prototype and like how that fits into a production. The important question is now, how do you prototype? The important question is, when will I drink a sip of water, actually? We can have two main approaches to prototyping. We can explore, which means to embrace randomness, or we can be directed, which is a kind of calculated gambling, right? Where you always take the option that has the best chances of success. The important thing that I want you to take away is that you can decide when you use which approach. Being conscious of, being able to say, I will just roll the dice and I'll see what happens. That's one option. And the other option being, I will do a thorough calculation of like randomness tables to see which is the safest bet. Those are two options. And at every step in your game development, you can choose which one you want to do. And sometimes going crazy will be useful. And sometimes doing a calculated gambling will be useful. Sometimes, one might be actually harmful at certain phases of certain projects. That's something that you need to figure out for yourself. What I'm trying to pass on is that there are two extreme things you can do. And then there's a whole scale of stuff between them. And you have to choose when you use which approach. As a rule of thumb, I'd say if you don't really know what you want to do, you should explore. And if you have a goal, you should try to reach it, right? As a rule of thumb, actually kind of that goes beyond the scale of this talk and my possibilities of graphic design to explain what I mean there. Because we can have, like, this is another one of those perfect maps where we can see in the beginning you do a lot of exploring, and then the further the project goes on, the less exploring you do and the more directed you become, because you already tested all of the options out in the beginning. And then gradually, you can phase out the testing, because you realize, I don't need to test everything anymore. I already did that. But you need to be conscious of it to kind of stop the pattern of just going in that boat and riding out into the ocean. You need to kind of be aware of what you're doing to be able to change it. So you can go from exploratory prototyping to directed prototyping, but also you can go from directed prototyping to exploratory prototyping. This is what happens when you start the game and then at the end you realize, oh, there's a bunch of stuff that I didn't consider and that I now need to quickly wrap up, right? And there's just so many possibilities opening up. I need to just stop trying to reach my goal, and I need to explore possibility space that I created for myself here a little bit to get more information about where I actually am and what I can actually do. So you can go from a very clear focused production to a very kind of like exploratory production, but it doesn't need to get messy. It doesn't need to get bad for you. It doesn't need to feel bad if you just actually stop and think a little bit about what you're doing and why you're doing it. The worst enemy of any production is not knowing why you're doing what you're doing. So now we get into the fancy territory, because we can be exploratory and directed, which means which relates to how we work. This whole dichotomy, you either go exploring or you know what you want to do. This affects how you work. This is what we've talked about for a long time. Now we get a second contender, which is structural and immediate prototyping. Oh boy, this sounds like great fun. It looks like this, you know. I said in the first talk, I said, oh wow, you know, scales are so cool because you can express everything if you just have enough scales. Well, here's the second scale. Here's the thing that allows us to express everything. I will go through this relatively quickly. It's not as involved and important. I think it's easier to understand, so it's here. You have structural stuff in your game, and you have immediate stuff in your game. Again, these are two extremes, and then there's a whole sliding scale in the middle, but I will just cover the two extremes because I think it's kind of obvious what I'm talking about. The immediate parts of your game are the mechanics and levels. This is the stuff that we explored last time with the morphological matrix stuff. It's the moment-to-moment gameplay, right? The immediate part of your game is like, how does the boo in Super Mario work, right? It's like, how far can you jump? How much ammo do you have? You know, all of these basic stuff that is kind of immediately there and that you can just kind of type away when you start to prototype. You're like, okay, so, you know, how far can I jump? Do I have a double jump? What happens when I touch the spikes? How many lives do I have? All of that stuff, right? All of that is immediate. And here it helps if you want to come up with immediate stuff, immediate parts of your game, the morphological matrix, the kind of map of the possibility space of video games, that just helps you here. That makes it easier to come up with immediate parts of your game. And this is fast to implement, and it gets fast results because it's immediate, right? You type in the movement code and your character moves, and that's it. It's cool, it's immediately there, but it is not a kind of larger progression, which is what the structural parts of your game are all about. This means stuff like systems and progressions, like an XP system, you know, or like how do you advance through the world? What kind of things do you need to do? And like how often do you need to do them? Like how do you unlock these doors is mostly how that plays out. It's about the larger pacing of the gameplay, where you can have, like in single player games, you often have many different areas, and each of those areas has a kind of distinct color. And those colors don't repeat, right? They are paced over like 60 hours of gameplay. So to create a kind of experience that is changing over a long stretch of time. This has not as much to do with the immediate how much do you shoot and how fast do you shoot and how much can you jump and like what does the spike do. This is more about how much ammo, you know, what is the kind of ammo distribution over your whole game. And typically you could say in the beginning you have a lot of ammo, and then as the game goes on and on, you get less and less ammo because we can expect you to get better, right? And then you can pace like difficulty curves and these kind of resource distributions. This is structural stuff. This is the stuff where the spreadsheets come in. This is the stuff where I don't care anymore because I hate mathematics. But this is a very important part of game development. And here, in the structural parts of your game, having a clear vocabulary helps. Before, you know, in the immediate moment-to-moment gameplay stuff, the morphological matrix, the kind of understanding of the possibility space, allows you to quickly do stuff. When you talk about the larger structures, you need a clear vocabulary inside of your team. You need to know what specifically you mean when you say challenge, right? Because challenge has a lot of different meanings, but in your specific game project, it probably means a specific thing. Maybe when you say challenge, you mean a time trial. But when someone else hears challenge, what they hear is like the difficulty, right? So you need to kind of keep a list of vocabulary of like, what do you mean when you say specific things? Because otherwise every meeting is going to devolve into endless discussions about like, wait, isn't challenge kind of the thing where you have like a red shoe? And then, you know, you just talk about bullshit all the time. So in this, because it's so zoomed out and kind of like wider, you need a clear vocabulary. And this stuff is very slow to implement. It isn't as immediate, you know, you don't just put it in. You don't just come up with 5 colors and suddenly the whole game has those 5 colors. You need to make all of the assets. You need to make all of the things. You need to put them all in there. And the result is long-term. The result is a long-term engagement from the player. It's a long-term experience, right? It's like, again, in Dark Souls, the kind of souls system, which means that I'm kind of like always searching for harder enemies, which give me more points because I need to upgrade because my upgrades get more expensive. This kind of stuff. This is the structural part of your game. So we have immediate stuff, which is moment-to-moment gameplay. We have structured stuff, which is kind of removed and abstract. I mean, we all know kind of, we can all probably think of a bunch of examples of like the difference between structural and immediate and how they connect and like how they interact with each other. But now, actually, let me skip this. There's some structural prototyping tips. If you want, I can talk about that later. Structural and immediate, okay, it's cool. But now, boom! Mind blown! Shit, we put two scales above each other, and suddenly we can express everything. It's great. So now, maybe you know the political compass stuff. This is what I was trying to get at all the time. This kind of system, is very abstract, and I'm not saying that you should, like make little markers on it and say like, oh, today I'm going like 0.5% exploratory, and tomorrow I'll go like 3% immediate. It's not that kind of a tool. It's more like a visualization of how to work and a kind of like thinking help that for me has cleared a lot of stuff up about how games work and how game design works, and most importantly, about how I work. So this means that we have now 4 distinct kind of fields of prototyping. And this is where I kind of leave prototyping behind. I will still mention it sometimes to kind of keep up the facade. But this applies, in my opinion, to a lot of more stuff. I will talk about this through the lens of prototyping, also in the personal examples that I need to get to, so I will speed up this whole thing. So we have now 4 areas. This is the one that is now blue. Oh shit, I hope no one's colorblind. I'm sorry if someone's colorblind. I'm talking about the bottom left square right now. This is the exploratory immediate quadrant, right? Where you go exploring, and you go exploring specifically about moment-to-moment gameplay stuff. This is, the kind of stuff that was the homework last time. This is where most independent developers, myself included, get stuck forever. Where you go like, I just want to explore, I just want to try out some cool shit, and this is kind of funny. And you're always working in the moment-to-moment gameplay. You're always working in like, how far can I jump? Like, how many bullets do I have? What happens if I touch the ground? Maybe the spikes fly up. All of this, I love it. I think it's really cool, but it's just 1/4 of the whole quadrant. Because then we can also say, okay, we don't just want to explore the immediate moment-to-moment gameplay stuff. We want to get some certain results, right? So I'm like, okay, so I want to make a movement set that makes you feel small and vulnerable, right? This is stuff that you need for cinematic platformers and that kind of stuff. And you have a kind of clear direction, and then you realize it in the moment-to-moment gameplay. And it helps if you've been exploring before, but you need that kind of goal to work in this quadrant, in the bottom right, where you have like directed, immediate prototyping, where you prototype stuff, but you have a clear goal in mind, you have a clear test that you're doing, but you're doing it in the moment-to-moment gameplay stuff. And then here, this is the kind of opposite of the exploratory immediate. This is like my natural enemy quadrant, structural directed, where you have a clear idea of like, what kind of feelings the structure of the game should evoke, like what kind of emotions, what kind of pacing, all of this like large scale stuff. And then you have a clear idea about that and you test it. And you make basically a bunch of small slices. I think Bryn will later talk about vertical slices. This goes kind of in that direction. It's going to happen in 2 weeks, I think. You have to wait until then. So you have a kind of structure and you're doing a directed prototype about it. You have a clear kind of larger overarching experience that you want to create. And so you make a test of that larger overarching experience in like small snippets. So you make like 1 level from the beginning, 1 level from the middle, and 1 level from the end. And then you can kind of see the structure evolve. And then the last quadrant, which, is kind of like closer to my heart again, but I'm opposed to, I'm not good at structural stuff. So it's hard for me, is exploratory structural stuff where you go like, I want to make a structure, but whatever, let's just try stupid shit out with the structure, which is very expensive because structural stuff, has a long time to implement. It has a long-term reaction and stuff. It's not so cheap as the immediate prototyping. So if you go and you don't even have a clear goal, it's kind of super risky. The rewards can be super cool as well. But this is a kind of the least used quadrant, I would say. But these are, this is what happens when you combine exploratory and directed prototyping with the stuff that the game is made out of. So exploratory and directed prototyping is how you work. Okay, this is from left to right. How do you work? Do you get in the boat and get eaten by the shark? Or do you get in the boat and know exactly where you want to go? And then structural and immediate prototyping is what you work on, right? It goes from top to bottom, bottom to top. Do you work on the immediate moment-to-moment gameplay, or do you work on the larger structures, the larger arcs of your experience? But much more important is why do you work on any of that, right? Why do you work the way you do? Why do you work on what you work on? This is the most important thing. I've said it a couple of times today again, already. I think this is the most important thing you should take away from it. You need to be honest about what you want from your prototype. If you cannot be honest about what you want from your prototype, from your game, from your experience working on your game, you're gonna have a horrible time. And the crazy thing is that you can want anything. I will go about the, I will explain what I mean with this in the examples later. But you can want anything, right? Like you can start a game project and say, oh, I want to have a nice weekend. You can say, I want to start this game project because I want to make $1 million. You know, you can anything in between those two things, and like outside of those two things either. You can want to make $2 million. It's also allowed. You can want anything. But if you want to make clear decisions about how you work and what you work on, you need to understand why you work in the first place. If you're not honest to yourself about what you want, then you will not be able to control your workflow. This was my problem for years. And this is also, again, what I see in a lot of people, that there's a sort of desire to work creatively. But that desire is very unspecific. You just say, oh, I want to, you know, whatever. I just want to work creatively. I want to make games. But for a long time, I could not admit to myself that I wanted to make games commercially, that I wanted to make money from them. And so I was unable to test how well my games make money. I was unable to, you know, make a decision between, do I want to explore monetization methods and do I want to try this specific monetization method? Because the whole idea of monetization methods was kind of alien to me. So I had to be honest with myself before I could actually work. Please try to be honest with yourselves about what you want. This is so hard. It will take, it took, I don't know how long it will, maybe you already know what you want. It took me years of terrible pain and misery. So please try to be honest with yourself, because if you're not, it will cost you time and money and energy and burnout tokens and, you know, psychotherapy and whatever. This is really the important part. You can, you know, you can work exploratively or you can work directed. You can work on the immediate moment-to-moment gameplay stuff, or you can work on the larger arc of your game. But why are you working on each of those things? That's the most important question to answer. And now we get to the personal experience. With 10 minutes left, I will rush through this like crazy, which is good because this section is a mess. Anyway, so prototypes are tests. You can test how you work. You can test what you work on. But much more important is why you test in the first place. So what I did for years was that I wanted to make many small games, because this was what JW, the designer of Flambeer, had said is a good thing to do when you start making games. But this is where I wasn't honest with myself. I also wanted likes from Twitter. I also really wanted validation. And validation and games, you know, those are two different things. So I was eternally stuck between them and kind of like, I'm kind of making a game, but I also really want those Twitter likes, right? So you're kind of stuck between those two things, which means that I couldn't really focus on either of them, right? If I had been just honest with myself and said, I want to be an influencer, you know, which even now I'm saying with a negative connotation, because I don't want to be an influencer, obviously. I want to make games. But I couldn't really see that. I couldn't really say that to myself right now. I couldn't really admit that to myself. And maybe I also just needed it. So I made non-games, right? Like this is now we're entering the GIF phase where things will get finally interesting. Where I can make like, oh, I can make this prototype, like what if the keyboards from the key are kind of like interactive? And this is an interactive thing, but it's not really a test. Like, you know, I'm learning from it how to present stuff and whatever, but this is not really what I would consider for myself a game. This is a GIF for Twitter to get many likes, and I think it worked. I can't really remember. Then another thing I would do is like, I would be like, okay, so what if I make a game, but, you know, I don't really care about the gameplay. I just want to tell a funny story, right? Like, oh, look, the guy got taller. And then, oh, you can wall jump. So now you can, you know, and then, yeah, that's funny. That's nice. You know, that's a nice little story. Is it enough to make a game out of it? Probably not. But I mean, come on, it's a fun little story. And then, you know, I would just mess around. I would say like, okay, so what if the guy, you know, and he was falling down, and it's like, maybe that's funny, maybe that's a game, I don't know, but let's spend some time on it. And I would also, what I would do a lot is make lander type games, where if you touch the wall, you die. That's like kind of like a weird fascination of mine, because it's so immediate, because it needs like one line of code, and it's a functioning game. It's like the most immediate type of game that I can code. So I made a lot of those. And this is, you know, in the quadrant, in terms of the weird abstract theory, this is exploratory immediate prototyping. This is the kind of stuff that it has like long-term benefits, but it will not really yield anything either for the game, because it's stuck in the immediate gameplay, nor for the kind of prototyping thing, because there's a very small chance that what I'm doing will be usable later on. So then what I did, what I've been trying to gradually move towards is to get away from this like kind of like Twitter thing. I no longer want to be an influencer. Now I want to make games, but I still have this kind of process in me. So where I just constantly make small little things. I just don't tweet them anymore. So some topics or genres are stuck in my head, and I return to them periodically, and I make little exploratory prototypes. And sometimes one of them hits something nice, but that's not really the point. So this is like I've been testing for I think a year now. I've been playing around here and there, you know, just sometimes with AI stuff, where I go like, you know, this is how the AI in Quake works, where it goes to nodes if it can't see you, so it's always in a kind of position that makes sense. And it's like, that's not a game, that's nothing, right? There's nothing here that like speaks to me, but it's a concrete test that I did that I can build on. I'm also very interested in cellular automata. So sometimes I just make them, you know. I think I actually tweeted this one. I have also lost a lot of my GIFs. I realized in preparing this talk, like a lot of the GIFs I wanted to use for this are just on some hard drive I can't access right now. So, you know, a lot of that stuff. So I'm interested in cellular automata, which I return to for some time. I'm interested in making interactive text tools. So, you know, from time to time I return to that and make some stuff where you have like interactive graphics inside of the executable, which can then make some essays or whatever, you know. I'm also interested in cinematic platformers, which I mentioned already before. So this is like the 10th, you know, like exploratory prototype of like how to code a cinematic platformer, how it feels to make one. This is all, you know, still very immediate, but it's less exploratory, right? I'm no longer just sitting down and hitting the keyboard to come up with something. I have specific interests, right? I want to look at how cinematic platformers work. I still don't go up into the structural level. I stay in the immediate moment-to-moment gameplay level, but it's more concrete. I have a specific theme, a specific topic that I'm kind of interested in. And then this is chronological, by the way, and I think we're going to be over time. I'm sorry, we're going to be over time. You'll have to stay a little bit longer. This is Ord, which is a minimalistic text adventure that we made in a group of like 4, 6, 7 people actually in Sweden. So I was working on this from the prototype to the last update, and with this thing, right? This is the first larger scale commercial project that I worked on. This is where we finally did the test of like how do you sell something on Steam? Because what happened was we made a cool basic prototype in a day. I was like, oh, that's really cool, right? This shows potential. Our kind of prototyping has shown something that's good. That's cool. We want to spend some more time on it, which will involve some more prototyping in the future. But before we committed to any of that, and this is, you know, where I was talking before about the larger scale goal that kind of like guide your whole project. This is where we spent 3 days discussing that larger goal. 3 days in a basement in Sweden, just talking about what we want out of this cool prototype that we're going to make into a full game. What do we want out of it? What do we really want? And this is personal stuff. This is not just about like, oh, I really like money, I want to make money. This is like, you know, how important is money to me? How important is money to me in the long term? What does this mean for, you know, our release schedule? And then in the end, you know, after 3 days of discussing this stuff, we settled on, we want to test how Steam works. Because we realized we have no clue how to upload a game to Steam. So we picked the easiest thing and we said, this is our guiding principle. This is the thing we care about the most. And then we went and we explored the possibility space. And then we went and had a clear goal of where we wanted to go. And then we worked towards that. And then every time something came up where there was a lot of friction, where we weren't sure, like we could spend some more time exploring here, or we could try this really cool thing. Every time we were in this position where we were like, oh, we could, do a specific type of work. We always asked ourselves, why should we do this specific type of work? And if it went against our guiding principle, which most of the time it did, we didn't do it. Because this guiding principle was what we had agreed upon as our North Star. This is another term for this that I hear all the time. Other people call it tenet. But so it's a silly little game. It has it doesn't have a coherent world. There's a lot of cool features that we cut. There's a lot of stuff that we removed from the game because we just wanted to test how Steam works. Some cool stuff we got in. So we were thinking a little bit about the structure of the game. We were thinking about a little bit about the moment-to-moment gameplay stuff, but mainly we were thinking about our huge, overarching, large goal. And now we're making ORT 2, which is much more exploratory. Right now we have no real big idea of like what the overarching principle is, but we know that we want to pay more attention to the structure of that game, and we're also experimenting with the moment-to-moment stuff where we can now use multiple words to create one sentence instead of the kind of single words that were the rule for the last game. This is too many examples, I'm sorry. For Godwin, it was the same. Godwin was made like I think a year later. Again, in the beginning, we sat down and we said, okay, we need a very clear goal. And that very clear goal was to be done in a month. This was at the start of the pandemic when I lost my job because I used to work in a hostel. With a very clear goal, let's be done in a month to see, how much money this makes. Because now we know how Steam works. Let's see, can we do it better? And let's do it very quickly because I would have to get a job again. So this affected every decision. We have to be done in a month. Again, everything in the game, every little prototype I could have made, before I made any decision about what to prototype, I asked myself, will this, help it be done in a month or not? And so this is, again, I don't have any GIFs of that from the prototype, which is a shame because I recorded the whole process. Basically, the game takes place on a single screen, and it only moves up and down. It doesn't move left or right, simply because having a camera system that can handle, all 360 degrees would have been very expensive to make. And then you shoot the guy, and when everyone is dead, the floor beneath you breaks, which means, this is not just random stuff. This means that the floor generation code, because the floor is like randomly generated, doesn't need to take into account how far I can jump, because it breaks, it disappears. I don't need to move up ever. There's no ledges that I have to take care of and stuff. And so I can just destroy the terrain and fall down. And then on the next terrain, there's just going to be 2 people, right? And you can see with the little exclamation points on the next one below that, there's just going to be 3 people. And that's the kind of larger structure. It's extremely simple. And the larger structure is very, very much informed by the moment-to-moment gameplay. The moment-to-moment gameplay is you run and you jump, and when everyone is dead, the floor beneath you breaks. So there's no decision to make about where you go or like what kind of like upgrades you do. You just fall down. The structure of this game is very, very immediate. And then when you die, something falls on you just because that's poetic justice, and that's kind of funny. And then when you fall down often enough, you fall out of the whale and you fall from the sky because the whale is in the sky for no reason. But there's also a secret ending where you can use all of the achievements to escape the whale. And this is the kind of like larger, big picture structure stuff that's completely disconnected from the game. I added it. It was very important to me, but I had to add it in the last minute because I wasn't sure if it would otherwise kill the scope of the project. And so, in the same way, the shop system of that game is very, very bare bones. It's very, very surface level. And so we did only directed prototyping, right? Every prototype we did was clearly judged against one parameter. Can this be done extremely quickly? And this speed comes at the cost of intentionality, of like actual artistic expression and whatever. I'm still kind of sad that we did that. But it's a very directed game, and it's very much focused on the immediate qualities of gameplay. The larger structure suffered because of the type of goal that we picked. And then I have to really speed up. This is anyways recorded in a different talk. Quamp is probably the largest game I've ever worked on, again with a team of cool people, where I wasn't really, this is a production that didn't go well. The last two productions were kind of like, we know where to go, and we took some, we took some cuts. It cost us some of our intentions, but we stuck to our larger goal. This is a kind of good practice example. And now this is a horrible practice example, because for Quamp, I wanted to make a smart game, but I didn't really want to admit that to myself. I just thought, I'm going to make like a good indie game and it's going to be great. I just wanted to be seen as smart. So I prototyped a lot of clever mechanics. And then when I tried to put them together, I got lost again and again because I was stuck so hard in the immediate part of the prototyping. I never checked out the structure for years, right? Because I was scared of the structure. So in the end, what saved me was that I took the immediate mechanics, the stuff that I had prototyped in the exploring kind of like phase where I said before with the morphological map, where I just connect all of the stuff. I just took that and I sorted it into 4 groups. And those 4 groups are the 4 worlds of the game. And then you just go through them one after the other. And that's the structure. The structure very much grew from the immediate mechanics. This is the first prototype made in 2017. Again, it's a large like graveyard of prototypes that you can draw from if you do a lot of exploratory prototyping. Then you're the ball from Quamp, from Pong. That's what I should have said maybe in the beginning. You're the ball from Pong, and you have to like escape the maze. So you can only change direction on the horizontal axis when you bump into something. So this collision is a central part of the game. So I built a lot of mechanics that work with this collision. So this is one of the clever prototyping mechanics where the thing, it kind of bounces you back and then you can pass. You can use this in puzzles and you can use this in challenges. It's very nice. And then you can also say, okay, so what if you touch another object, the spikes, then you die. That's just a basic video game interaction, right? Everyone who plays video games knows about this interaction, but it's also part of this kind of map of the possibility space. And then I said, so what if you touch this button, then the wall doesn't just disappear like in the first one, instead it switches. And this is very obvious stuff. Like none of the stuff I showed now is revolutionary, but I carefully mapped out every version of this and tried out all of the versions that didn't work. And I actually prototyped them, which means that I had a huge amount of mechanics to choose from going forward in the whole production. Not just stuff like this, which is very obvious and basic, but convoluted, crazy kind of stuff, which then became mechanics. Like you can see it in this, right? This is a rotating spike. It's very basic. If you touch it, you die. And it just rotates constantly. But then, because I have the collision, I can make a spike that only rotates when you touch the ball. So suddenly, you have an interesting gameplay mechanic. And then I can put it to the most extreme version if I say, every time you press the button to change your vertical direction, the spike rotates. So suddenly, you not only control the ball, but also the rotating spike. And it's this kind of progression that also makes up the structure of the game. You go from the most basic to a kind of interesting to a somewhat convoluted mechanic. And then I built a skeleton around this. So you have boss fights, and the first one is just trying to evade you. The second one uses a mechanic that is very much tied to where you touch the wall. So again, the collision with the wall is very important. And then in the last one, every time you press the button, it spawns a spike. Because this kind of mechanical stuff then becomes the structure of the game. And then, I test all of that out. This is, the GIF quality is bad, but this is a huge level with a lot of hand-placed tiles. And I checked that before with just a white surface to see if it would look cool. I was in the immediate and exploratory area for way too long with Quamp. I was scared of the structure. And then by looking at the mechanics and sorting them into the structure, I could build a skeleton to pull me out of the kind of immediate exploratory stuff that only happened because I wasn't ready to admit to myself that I wanted to make a smart game. If I had just admitted to myself, I want to make a smart game, I can just steal the structure from other smart games, right? Maybe that's not smart, but at least I would be happy about my choices and my goal. So what happened with Quamp is that I start in exploratory immediate and then I travel over years. This is 5 years, by the way, of time. I travel over time to a kind of place where I know where I want to go and where I can work on the structure of the game. I will skip this. This is kind of a lot of stuff. This is producer. which is a narrative game, which also doesn't have a clear goal, where I'm kind of stuck, which is a problem because I cannot really figure out what I want and why I want to make this game. I know I want to make it, I just don't really know why yet. So I need to do some exploring to figure that out. Because I'm stuck here. I'm stuck in the exploratory immediate kind of sausage, which is a bad place. I will also skip this. There's no time. But this is sad. This is a cool one. I will instead, I'm so much over time. I'm sorry. I can put the slides. Maybe I can post the slides in the Discord and you can see the GIFs later. I have to skip this as well. This is the one where I said I was working on it for 8 months. Where first I make a platforming version, and then I make a top-down version because the platforming version has some balancing issues. So this is the same kind of game where you shoot stuff out of yourself, and then it follows you and wants to kill you, and you have to evade it. And then I put that in a top-down perspective, where you are a little guy and you run around and you shoot stuff and you have to evade it because it wants to kill you. It's kind of the same game, but it's also completely different. And then, if you remember the AI prototype from before, where it was like, I'm never going to use this for anything. If you look at the blue character, which is the player character stand-in, how that character is controlled is with the mouse. This character is not hooked to a keyboard. But I didn't want to make a keyboard controller because I just wanted to test how it feels if, it's faster to move the character around with the mouse. So for the purpose of testing the AI, I hooked it to the mouse. And suddenly I realized, oh shit, what if I make the same game, but now you control it with the mouse? So again, like the graveyard of old ideas helped me with this one prototype that I've been working on over time to make it into a real thing. And then we went into production with a team where in the beginning we discussed what we really want from the game. What we really want from Gebala. And what we came to, the conclusion we came to after really some, personal discussion again, was that we do not want to stress ourselves, which is, completely different than like wanting to get it done in 1 month or wanting to put it on Steam. We do not want to stress ourselves, which then becomes the driving force behind every decision. This means that we have delayed the game by like 3 weeks. This means that we have not tested out a very cool graphical feature. This means that this thing that I built, where we can dynamically change the shape of the level, is not going to be made, right? I prototyped it, but it would mean that we have to stress ourselves. So it's gone, And this kind of like Tenet, North Star kind of thing really, really helps to focus a development. And then I would have talked more about like specific mechanics, where we start with the kind of immediate directed goal, where I directly know what I want to achieve. And then during development, we did a kind of excursion into the structural part of the game to figure out how it's paced. And now, currently, like literally right now, he's working, I hope, we're coming up with more variations for the immediate gameplay, because we realized the structure works, the basic of the immediate gameplay works, but we need more immediate gameplay. So no stress and whatever. And then I will go through this. I think I really like this one. This is a small project that I made recently. I'm working on this alone, or I worked on it alone. It's actually done. It's called Mos Alina. I was thinking a lot about immersive simulators, immersive simulations, which pride themselves. It's games like Thief and Deus Ex and like Dishonored and stuff. It's games that tell you, oh, you have as many options as possible. You can choose, so many options to solve the problems. And I was thinking, this is kind of funny to put that into a 2D platformer. And it's also kind of funny to make it look completely horrible and crazy. And so this is the first version, the first exploratory prototype of like, I will give the player 100,000 options to solve any problems by doing a lot of crazy, insane stuff. And then, obviously this looks kind of crazy and the code base was horrible. So I abandoned it. And then a couple of times later, I was like just playing around. I was trying to be a baby. I was trying to go like, goo goo gaga, let's just see what happens. And I made a physics-driven platformer. You can kind of like climb on the edge there and then still jump up. And I love that. And then I remembered, oh wow, what about that immersive sim prototype? Let's combine that. Let's give you items that you can throw. And because it's a physics-driven platformer, which was not intended, which is just a lucky coincidence, I can affect the movement of the player character with all of the other physics objects. which means that suddenly all of the things that you can throw, like in this prototype, all of the stuff you can throw works a lot better because it's cooked to a single physics system that affect everything. It's a lucky coincidence. And then, I worked on that some more. And then I was kind of like trying consciously to explore the structure. I was trying to, because normally I never do this. So I was like, I never explore the structure. And then always the projects die later or they suffer because I don't do that. So let's actually just try out some stuff with the structure. And I added a money system. And then I changed the money system so that you could kind of like select the items that you want. And then out of that, it would calculate how much money you get for beating the level. And all of that is stupid. And then I put some boxes in so that you could always be sure to beat the level. And then, there's some funny emergent behaviors there. But still, the money system felt kind of crazy. And then I was like, okay, let's go completely exploratory. Let's make a radical structure and let's just come up with whatever. Let's just go crazy, goo goo gaga. And I just took all of the level selection and item selection code that I had and I randomized it. And everything is now selected at random. You get a random level, you get random items, and every time you play a level, you have completely different tool set just because it's completely random. You have no choice anymore. So suddenly you have the puzzle of like, wow, I have so many options to solve the problem. You have that randomly, which is fascinating. And I love it. And I think it's really cool. And then I add production value. This is the same game. It's the same code. Everything is the same. But now I spend some time on the art and animation. And, I'm not an artist, I'm not an animator, but it looks a lot better. And this is, again, one of the things that you should take away from this talk. Please, if you want to make a prototype, don't add production value to it. Because you can see all of this testing happens while the game looks the same. And while it looks very, very ugly. And then as soon as I find the thing that I like, as soon as I find the thing where I'm like, this is how the game should be. As soon as the prototyping is done, I can add production value to make it look more interesting and more pretty. So, we are now over time. Let's talk about the homework. Last week, I gave you the task to come up with a bunch of interactions. And now I talk a lot about the figure out what you want, find out your true meaning in life. Why do you want to work on stuff? That's kind of like you have to figure that out with yourself. That's very personal. I don't want you to share that with me. That's something you have to figure out in your own head. So instead, we will do the homework about the structure of the game. Last time we do very immediate interactions, right? You write a lot of immediate mechanic stuff. And now I want you to take each of the things you write and think that a whole level, imagine a whole video game level is made around this interaction. And then I want you to put them into a linear structure that makes sense to you. You just take the things that you sent in last week and you put them in an order. You go first level, second level, third level, right? You make a structure, you make a large pacing, because this is what everyone is always very uncomfortable with, this kind of large decision making. I just want you to get comfortable with that. So it's a linear structure. You cannot choose, do I go left or right? You play the first, then you play the second, you play the third level. You go through all of the level. Just put them in a structure that makes sense to you, where you think that this is cool, and then quickly explain why you did that in 2 to 3 sentences. So you just take the thing you sent in last time, you copy paste it, and then you explain why you put it in that specific order. That's the homework. It should be on the screen right now. This was prototyping. This was a 2-hour lecture. It's very intense, very exhausting. I hope it was useful. I will quickly sum up everything that I've talked about so far. You can, when you go prototyping, you can either go explore, which means to sit in the boat and to probably get eaten by the metaphor shark, or you can have a clear goal, which doesn't mean that you will succeed, but if you fail, you can make a correct scientific testing of where you want to go the next time. But you can also work on the gameplay stuff, on the immediate moment-to-moment stuff, or on the high-level structure. And you have to choose why and what, how and what you work on intentionally by being honest with yourself. I hope this kind of demonstration of personal project in the end shows you the kind of cost of not being honest with yourself. It's many years of like making prototypes, which, still has a kind of long-term effect use. But things only become really interesting for me, or like things only really start to move as soon as I begin by being honest with myself and by really trying to figure out what I want to do and why I want to do it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Josh. That was an amazing presentation. Wow, all of the examples, all of the stuff. Phew, that was a lot of material and a lot of like stuff. And
Yes.
I think also our like participants can agree with that. Yeah, we're gonna go slowly to the Q&A session. I think you can take some time to sip some water. That was quite.
I'm fine. We are already over time, so we can go quickly. I will try to be so we stay in the time limit somewhat. I'm sorry.
No, that's not problem. I mean, that's. I think you really had like a lot of like really good points, and yeah, you had like a lot of content that you like really like crammed in and like just shoved in. So I think it's really nice. I wouldn't do it any other way. So
Nice.
yeah, thank you again.
I think I know how I would do it differently. Next year I will put more. I will whatever. I will put both directed and exploratory in the first lecture, and then have the second lecture for the structure and the immediate. But I underestimated the time. But yes, questions.
Cool. Questions. Okay. So first question, I think that goes in the context of Quamp.
Can you explain what you mean by smart game a bit more? I mean something like Jonathan Blow would make, where people go like, wow, that's so smart. It's like a mind-bending puzzle and you can reverse time. And it's like also emotionally impactful. I'm talking derogatory, but I genuinely think that's a cool thing where you go like, oh yeah, like Braid tells the story and I want Quamp to tell the story about like what it means to be alive, and I want to express that through puzzle platforming. And that's a genuine goal, right? And that's a genuine thing that you can try if you're honest about it. I didn't want to be honest about it because it felt kind of pretentious. It still does, but you can be cringe as long as you believe in yourself. I think that's okay.
Okay, thank you. And next question, I think it's more about the homework.
Yeah. What to do if the game isn't level-based? Damn, interesting question. I would have to check out the specifics to give a specific answer. If it's not level-based, then quickly, just instead of explaining why you put it in the order that you put it in, just quickly explain to me the kind of structure and then describe like how the things connect. A very, very surface level. This can get very out of hand very quickly. Just in a basic way. Oh, okay, because you used your own game. Maybe I can get in touch with you when I review all the homework. I would need to see the thing to give a concrete answer.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that could be like I guess per homework thing.
Yeah,
So,
per Discord or whatever.
Yeah. Cool. One more question about homework, I think.
Great presentation. Thank you. What if some of the interactions from last week simply don't make sense? Can we remove them and just use, let's say, 12 levels or what we have to try to squeeze them in? Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because I mean, if they don't make sense, then maybe they should be like at the end because they're so hard. But if you personally think that they shouldn't be in the structure because you don't want them there, then don't use them in the structure. That's perfectly okay. That's what I did with Quamp. I made a lot of mechanics and then half of them are really bad.
Okay. Next one is again, thank you for the presentation and all the examples. Maybe while we wait for more questions, One question from my side. What would you say, like, like kind of like, stereotypes for maybe like, AAA developers, indie, mobile, consoles, like, what would you say, like, in which kind of category they go, like, like structural and like, directed, or like,
Interesting.
explorative, and just kind of like,
It's
kind of
so
like,
weird. There are, I mean, one of the for mobile, for hyper casual, which is the only part of mobile that I got in contact with. Like I know people who work for those companies and stuff, and I did an interview for one of them. But the where like for hyper casual, it's um, very hard to say. It's like they use everything, right? Like in the uh, idea testing talk, they say they go on TikTok and they replicate the kind of thing, so they take a
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very directed, you have a clear goal. But then I know people from the companies more from like Denmark and Sweden, where their approach to prototyping is much more kind of like coming from a basic, from a small thing, and then you grow from there. So, and both are making kind of hyper casual, or like both
Mm,
are making
mm,
like mobile games that are very reliant on like advertising. They just have different approaches to the same thing. So maybe, I don't know. It's very hard. But I would say the Nordic countries, like the mobile developers from the Nordic countries, work much more from a small exploration basis, where they start
mm,
with something and then they grow from there. And everyone else, it seems, works more directed or like more controlled. When I think of like a Russian mobile developer I know, and the talks I hear here, and the American models, it seems much more directed.
mhm.
But for console, I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone.
It was just like a kind of in between, kind of like a question. If you just
I
like,
mean,
by
no. I think most indie developers, or like this is what I see, right? Like most young indie developers, people who
the.
start out in school, or because they want to be like Edmund Macmillan or something, they kind of like get stuck in the lower left quadrant, where you go like explore the immediate moment-to-moment gameplay. And even if you make like a strategy game, you get stuck in making the immediate stuff of the strategy game, and you get stuck making the immediate stuff of the board game, and you never get to the larger kind of like removed level ideas, because it's just a different way of thinking than when you think of game development. For me at least, it took a long time to even really understand what it means to have like a larger arc of progression, because it was just like, I hit the computer and it makes a funny sound, it's perfect. What more do I want? And then you kind of scale up from there. But I
Okay,
don't know.
cool.
I feel like people, like, there's video game universities that have like very high hiring rates in Sweden,
Mm,
and it feels like they are absolutely kind of like trained from a kind of like 100% execution
mm.
standpoint. So they are like really trained to like take a kind of
Oh,
prompt, like to get something, and then to get there like really efficiently. Um,
mm,
because like for the larger structures, also in Paris, I think there's one school like that, where basically like everyone who goes there either drops out because of crunch, or they get hired because they can take the crunch. um,
Wow. Okay.
and they are very. But then the people, funnily enough, the people I know from those schools, they have a very hard time to start from scratch. They can work
Mm,
extremely well with directions, but I meet them when they try to make their own projects, and they struggle. Both of the groups I know struggle a lot with it.
mm.
Because,
Yeah, I
it's a
think.
huge field. I think I said it last time. It's like a gigantic field, and there's so much stuff going on, which is why you need all of the scales and the kind of abstractions to kind of make sense of it a little bit, because it's just so big of a topic.
Okay. That was really perfect answer. I mean, you even like went out of scope of this question, but like it was really cool to see that
Yeah,
perspective.
that's the benefit of forgetting what the question was. You just kind of keep talking.
Thank you. So next question is,
How much money did Godwin make? before taxes, maybe like 15,000 euros or something. Quite a lot of money. It made, I don't know if I can say that. Bleep. It's especially on the consoles. We worked with a third-party publisher who put it on the console where we just make a bunch of money. It's still, some of it is coming in. It's not enough to live on, right? It's like it's one small drip of income that, you know, is kind of gets overshadowed by some actual business I did recently. Like in terms of like income from the games, actually, I would have had to quit a few months ago. But luckily I was able to do a business deal that is not public yet. That kind of saves my finances. But what it did show me, because it made like $5,000 in 1 month, it made me realize, oh, if I take taxes and everything away from this, I make more than I did at my job where I got fired with Godwin. So I was like, okay, it is possible. And then I got the investment to make Quamp and stuff. So it was a kind of like economic test that was successful.
Maybe one sub question to this one. How to phrase it? How much experience, like, did you had, like, before you were like capable of doing that in 1 month, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, like, see, like, oh, somebody did something in 1 month, I can also do it, right? But like usually, like, those people have, like, I don't know, 10 or I don't know 5 years experience in the industry, and they know how to, and as you said, like, you have like bunch of prototypes, you know how to make stuff quickly, right? So
That's a very good point. Also, yeah, I should probably stop talking about it like that, because it's not 1 month. Actually, 1 month later, I was still kind of struggling to find energy, because I kind of like spent so much energy in that 1 month that I have to recover. So it was a kind of crunch, which is bad, and which the result is also not what I want and stuff. Before that, I had been making games. It's 2 years ago. I'm now 26. I was 24, 19. 5 years of making games as a hobby, and of those 5 years, maybe 3 years where I was really obsessed and really made a lot of stuff. Like I did one game a month. I did one game a month for like a year.
nice.
Like every year I made
Whoa.
every month I made one game, and then I did one game a week, and I did like 1 hour game jams and stuff. Like I really trained that for 5 years, I'd say. And I also used a very lightweight engine, which is Construct, which is not Unity, right? Like if I want to put in a controller plugin in Unity, like my C# editor like dies or whatever. It's a fucking mess. So with Construct, it's limited, but it's faster. So yeah, but it's a good point. I should probably not. I should have added that to the gut whale section. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's just kind of like, usually it's kind of like an asterisk, because like usually like people don't see like how much, before work goes into that, like before kind of this kind of overnight success stories.
It's also not an overnight success. Like holy, like it's. I mean, I made very little money at my job. I was like a minimum wage worker, right? I made a little bit more than minimum wage. But yeah, it's really funny how that happens, because I'm usually completely on your side. I just completely forgot it. Like I showed with the production, where it's like a lot of like crazy branches and everything is shit, and then you just remember the arrow. It's kind of like that. That's scary. But yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Next question.
Do you ever get lost in optimizing, researching, and picking algorithms, thinking and planning the technical architecture of the game? No. Because my skill, this is what I'm realizing now in Gibala, my skills are not in coding. My skills are in understanding the kind of logic of how video games work, but I don't really understand how the tech stuff behind it works. So I know which kind of like lever I have to push, but I don't know what happens inside of that lever, which is kind of limiting, and like, how I can use it. But I have never in my life researched an algorithm, because this is a kind of optimized thing that I think, that from my perspective, becomes important when you have like 30 people on your team and one of them makes a level building algorithm. You know, if you have 2 people on your team, then one of them has to make the levels and the other has to kind of like put out every fire because it's just not enough time for that. Yeah. No, actually, interesting. I did get lost building my own framework for a narrative game, for the one I skipped because there was no time for a producer. I was actually building the first time, maybe this is more in the direction, a kind of technical architecture for a project. I was building it inside of another game engine without any programming knowledge. Like it's an engine that's like an old computer. It's like based on physical collision of points. It's crazy, but it works. And I got totally lost in doing that. So I can definitely, I do it on like a kind of sandcastle level, I guess, where I get lost in that stuff. Yes, it cost me actually a lot of time. And I still don't really know how to get out of that hole.
I would just add like some minor subjective remark from me. Like, I think sometimes it's better, like, not to know how some things work. Like, how I see it, because I'm also more coming from programming perspective, like that I usually tend to over optimize at the beginning, right? And then I get lost as this question, like, I get just lost and like, optimizing and like prematurely optimizing things. And then I could be like doing like, 3 more features, but no, I'm just optimizing like this one. And that is bad if you want to do, I mean, it's bad like in general, like if you want to do like, if you want to like finish the game, that's bad. I mean, you do optimization, I guess, at the end.
I would say
Sorry?
it's production value. This is I didn't consider it because I never optimize, but I think it's production value. It will make the game run better on so many computers. So it's it's a cherry on top to have it optimized. From my perspective, there's different approaches. Like nothing I say here is like the truth. There is people who will only they make like Dwarf Fortress and it's perfectly optimized all the time or whatever, right? It's like if you're like really hardcore about this, sure.
Yeah, and not to say that like
to get lost, maybe that's a good.
And not to say that optimization is like bad, but like you said before, like if you have like team of like more developers, then you should do like the whole planning, like dividing like what each person will do, like how this all come together. But if you're a guest 2 or like 1-man band, like
there is I hear a story. I think it's true. I don't know if it's true. There's a guy in DICE in Call of Duty in Sweden, and his job is to make rocks, and he makes the best models of the rocks. It's perfectly optimized. It's hyper realistic. All of his life he makes rocks, right? You cannot take this guy and tell him to make a game, but you can cannot tell me to make a rock that will go in Call of Duty. It's a specialization versus generalization kind of
it is.
I think of this guy a lot. I hope he's having a good time.
Yeah, but like sometimes like that happens, like in big companies, like I guess in big tech companies, like you get really specialized in like just one thing, like I don't know, and then you just do that. I don't know, like I guess it's also fun or not. I don't know, like I mean you're part of the game. I don't know, like for me, like it's
It's very strange because this stuff has a huge impact on like it's very important, and I think if you get into this hyper specialization, you don't really go there if you don't like it. I don't think you could force someone to become the best rock maker. And there's I know a guy who is like a very huge nerd for geography and like for how the plant life impacts the kind of like hill shapes and stuff. And he is like doing the level design for the Arma games. So he is in heaven, But if you tell me to make a naturalistic hill, I will go quit. But he loves it, Like he's very happy. He can talk a lot about that stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, I think there are like no more questions. We're gonna just wait a few more minutes for any other questions. But if not, I'm gonna say like the closing words. Thank you again, Joss, for all of the like sharing the knowledge, like showing a lot of examples, like for like this like amazing 2 hours of lecture. And I hope that I can invite you again some other like conference or like talk or like some program. And yeah, for the official part, homework will be until Saturday, till 11. And Josh we'll see when will you, I guess, do it all together or like maybe like separately. We'll see how you'll do it.
I think I would prefer to do it separately, so I can get a clear picture of
Cool.
every step and see what kind of changes.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, that's that. Yeah, please, like all of the like details about this program are like in the description, and we see you next week with we have an asset pipeline, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, this is correct. Asset pipeline from Sayed, and he'll talk about how you can do like how the whole 3D pipeline, how you make the assets, and how do you put them in your prototypes. And so it will be like a natural progression. And after him, it will be Bryn, as you already mentioned, Josh, and he will go into the vertical slice. And yeah, and again, thank you all for like joining us on this talk.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for the questions. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, it was fun, but very exhausting. I will go sleep now.
cool. And have a good night. And we all see you like next week.
Cool.